Welcome to the Bottom Line Podcast with Nicholas Kuzmich, where we discuss what matters most, the bottom line, featuring the top minds in their industry. Now, let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Nicholas Kuzmich here, host of the Bottom Line Podcast, where I connect with industry leaders and sometimes industry sleepers to discover and discuss what matters most. And to me, that is the bottom line. Past guests have included people like Paola Telfer, the founder of Sensei, Nathan Chang, founder of Founder, and so many more, all of which you can listen to however you listen to podcasts out there on the interwebs. This episode, like all of them, are brought to you by H2H Media Group. It's a company that I founded where we specialize in helping premium information businesses get more qualified leads without traditional funnels. To learn more, simply go to nicholaskuzmich.com and you'll discover how we can help you there. Now, Arash, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Nick.
Yeah. So like I said before, I don't really like, reading off biographies and giving off introductions that way, because I feel like they're just a little orchestrated. Why don't we start in your own words? So if someone were to say, I don't know who you are or what you do, how would you describe who you are, what you do, and maybe a little bit about your company? And you can take as long or as little as you like with that, because that's probably going to span into a whole bunch of other questions that I've got prepared for you.
Yeah, sure, Nick. I appreciate it. Who I am is a 47-year-old man who transformed his life through the philosophy that I teach. So I always say I was a great follower before I became a great leader. And I had, in my opinion, the greatest mentor in the world in Bob Proctor. And he became one of my closest friends. He was like a second father to me. And him and I were hip to hip for 15 years together. And once he left, I outgrew the environment and I said, I'm going to create my own company with everything that I've learned. And so what we do is we help inspirationally dissatisfied individuals.
I love that term.
Who want to 10x their life and create a life of freedom without grinding, without trading their time. And, I am big on processes. So I teach people the right processes to create the results. The results always happen. They're an effect of the processes we're practicing either consciously or unconsciously.
Right.
So we help people all over the world. I've been doing this for 17 years. And so I've got a world of experience. I always use the word experience because I think it's so important. There's a big difference between knowing and doing. And the experience is you do it. So anybody who comes in my program, they know that I know what I'm talking about, because anybody who comes in, I show them exactly what to do to get to where they are, because I've been on the other side of it. So right. I know their challenges. So we're blessed that we have a great clientele. We are not looking for people who want just a little bit growth. We're not the company for them. We teach people how to create exponential growth.
I love that. And I love, Mike brings up something I think we'll get into in just a second as well. The fact that in a 6-month period, you expect everyone to have not one, but 2 quantum leaps. And we'll define what that is. Some people, as they go through life and business and all these things, are thinking, well, I hope to have one major breakthrough in my entire life. That's unacceptable to you. So I know we're going to talk about that in just a second. But speaking of the clients, I mean, you've been in the business for several years now, obviously, and we'll get into some of the backstory there. But speaking of clients, does any one particular client to mind, if I were just, I know you don't have favorites and I know you're not allowed to have favorites, so we won't say that, but just to paint a picture of the type of people you work with and the kind of results that they get, can you tell us a story about someone that comes to mind about some of the transformation breakthroughs and quantum leaps that they've had?
Yeah, well, I have one because I spoke with him yesterday.
Perfect.
And he wouldn't mind getting a shout out because he's pretty proud of what he did. But I have a client in Colorado, Michael Minoka. He had been working with me and he's created really good results. But in June, I said, are you ready to sprint with me? and let's
Yeah.
create a massive quantum leap. And he said, I'm in. What do I have to do? I said,
Yeah.
we have to eliminate a lot of things that you're doing. So we eliminated a lot of his low productive activities and focused on his high productive activities. In 5 months since we had that conversation, he's broken his personal record in sales.
Wow.
He's the number one sales recruiter in his whole company, and his company's nationwide.
Wow.
And I asked him, I said, what was the difference? He said, your belief and then the process you gave me. He said, you made it so simple. And I said, that's what quantum leaps are.
Right.
Quantum leaps are about elimination.
Mm.
And most people are doing the wrong things. It's not that they're not working. Like Michael was doing a lot of good things, but he did a lot of, and he'd be the first to tell you, a lot of the wrong things as well. So it cancels out a lot of the good. So once we eliminate anything that doesn't serve us, it becomes so simple.
It so would you say, I think it was Michelangelo when being interviewed about the sculpture David, said, so how'd you do it? Like, how'd you do this masterpiece? And the response was, oh, that was easy. I just removed everything from the rock that wasn't David. And it was this idea of subtraction versus addition. Am I hearing that that's kind of the same thing of what you're talking about here?
It's exactly the same thing. I've been fortunate enough to see David live, and it's
Wow.
absolutely amazing. But
Yeah.
um, we've been trained at a young age that more is better. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to work more hours. And I guarantee a lot of the people listening to this are working too hard right now.
Mm.
And nobody has a money problem.
Hmm.
They have a mind problem. So every great mentor that I've been fortunate enough to study under never worked on my results. They always worked on my mindset.
Wow.
Quantum leap is very counterintuitive to the programming. The programming says let's work harder,
Right.
but it's only about working smarter. So
Right.
with my clients, Nick, what I tell them is this, and I'll tell you this, this is going to become so simple for everybody. If we just create 3 wins a day from our goal, so everything is demanded from the goal we want.
Right.
So if we create 3 wins a day, in 30 days, that's 94 and a half wins.
Mm.
In 90 days, that's around 198 wins. Not quite, but almost.
Right.
So if you and I had 198 wins, what do you think our results are going to be?
A lot better.
But most people are busy being busy
Right.
instead of being focused and having what I call sprints in their goal achieving activities. And when you're sprinting, what I've discovered, it takes 5 great hours to create a world-class life.
Wow.
I'm talking about focused hours. We have to lock in and have no distractions. The number one obstacle we have is distractions.
Right.
So once we eliminate the distractions and we focus on 3 wins or 3 actionable activities that we discipline from our goal, it becomes very effortless.
What might because like in the entrepreneurial space, for example, it feels like almost everybody leans on the reality that we're all entrepreneurs because we've got ADD or ADHD. And I bring this up because you talk about distractions, right?
Right.
Is that real? I mean, not real as in does it exist, but like if removing distractions is obviously key, which obviously it is, but everyone's leaning on this crutch of, well, I'm ADD or I've got an executive function disorder, or however you want to term it, which I put myself in that camp too. I get easily distracted. Can you talk a little bit about A, your thoughts on that, but also B, on for someone who is easily distracted, how might one start thinking about removing the distractions on focus time in order to focus on those 3 wins and 3 goals a day?
Yeah, I don't believe we should ever put a crutch or a label on ourselves because it becomes part of our identity.
Yes, right.
Now we're using that as a crutch. I have worked with a lot of people who have been diagnosed with ADHD, and you know what I tell them?
Mm.
I'm not going to buy into it.
I love it.
That's exactly what I tell them. I said, what I do is I don't see people where they are. I show them how to get to where they want to go.
Mm,
They don't hire me to be a yes person to them. They hire me so I can show them the right strategies to scale their business, to scale their life.
right.
So is it real? Yeah, I mean, you could see it a mile away. A couple months ago, I was sitting there's this steakhouse we go to, and I was sitting at the bar. I just finished a meeting and I wanted to eat something. And this guy comes in. I mean, his energy, you could see it.
Mm,
I was like, whatever you do, please don't talk to me. Nonfiction. And he comes in and he says, well, what do you do? So I tell him what I do. He says, I
sure.
need your help. But
Right.
I can tell you right now, I don't even know you, but you're so distracted. And he goes, that's exactly right. He said, my businesses are going the wrong way. And I said, of course,
Mm,
because of the distractions. We're too married to the present circumstance. And we've got to discipline ourselves to make up our mind that we're going to create exactly what we want. And we have to be relentless not to give in to the circumstances. And that's the most challenging part, not
right.
just as an entrepreneur, but as an individual, or else we're going to keep year after year, it's the same results over and over again.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you nailed it from the perspective of we give into the narrative and
That's right.
we assimilate it into our identity. In fact, would you go as far to say then that, I mean, everything we hold to be true, every expression of our being, every thing that we buy, everything in our fridge, all of it is a manifestation of the narratives we hold true to ourselves. And if that is in fact true, and you tell me, then we get to choose which narratives then we want to believe in. And so if it's either, hey, I can believe that I am ADD and maybe I'm clinically diagnosed that way, or so I can believe that narrative, or I can believe the narrative that, but I also have the power to be focused and choose to be distractionless and choose to go after the things that I desire. Is that true, or am I just making stuff up there?
No, you're not making stuff up. We always act in harmony to our story on a subconscious
Right.
level.
Right.
So you're using the word narrative, I use story, it's the same thing.
Sure.
Okay. So if we don't change, if we don't like our story, we want to get better results, we have to change the story. Like I never focus on changing myself from the old. I just focus on creating a new version of myself.
Oh,
So
that's good.
you want to create a new model. It's much easier to create a new model than to change the old.
Love
When
that.
we're trying to change the old, we're fighting ourselves. And that's much more harder. It's so much easier to behave our way into a new identity than it is to think our way into a new identity.
That's good. Yeah.
But you were bringing up narratives. It's interesting because it's very important we understand this. Our narratives is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It creates our identity, and our identity creates our results. So if you look at your results, you look at my results, all they are is a reflection on the truest form of our identity on a deep subconscious level.
Right.
Now, most people are trying to change results, but they don't know what creates results.
Mm,
So they're working on symptoms instead of the causes. The one comment I get, I always ask this question. I'll say, what creates results? And most people will say action. Some
right.
people say action and thinking,
Yeah.
but they don't have the picture.
Yeah.
Like if we reverse engineer results, results are a manifestation of our actions. Our actions are a manifestation of our programming, and our programming is a manifestation of our thinking.
Mm,
So we have to change our thinking. I would encourage everybody, my highest form of belief, like I changed because my thinking changed
right.
first.
Right.
So we've got to think from our future self. Like I want everyone to put their goal in their mind.
Mm,
Now, your future self is not a little bit better than who you and I are today. It is so much wiser, so much stronger, so much more strategic. So when we think and only accept ideas from our future self, we're walking into a completely new person. And then your programming's changing, your actions are going to change, your results are going to change.
because they're trying to catch up. In fact, I don't know if you've seen this. It was this I don't go on social much, but there's this trending thing on Instagram right now where people will kind of work through their own, like, let's call it a goals exercise of their future self. Essentially, they write out what is their future self, what does a day in the life of that future self look like, what is true for that future self, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they take that idea and they put it into Chat GPT and they say, can you rewrite this in the present day format as though I'm currently living it? Step one.
Mhm.
And then what the trend is people reading that output and getting a reaction. And most of the time it's people just bawling because they never saw it from that perspective. It was always like that aloof, far off thing. ChatGPT had this ability to write the future self as though it's now what an average day looks like. And they read that thing. And now for the first time in forever, they're like, oh, I see it, I feel it. And then some of them take it a step further and say, okay, if this is my future self, what are the things I need to do every single day to see this to be an outcome for me in the next little while? I mean, I don't know if you've seen that or heard that, but what do you think of that? Because I've heard future self being brought up a lot now. Is that a decent way to do it? Would you suggest another way to really picture the future self so you can have the rest of you line up into who that person is?
I mean, it's a great way to leverage ChatGPT.
Sure.
I mean,
Right.
it's a great way. Like, I always recommend you write out who your future self is, how do they behave. So it's the same thing they're doing.
Yeah.
They're probably getting a much more descriptive version that is beyond their imagination. So if they keep repeating that over and over again,
Mm.
put it on a recording, listen to it 10 minutes a day, they're going to change their programming. But what happens for most people, they don't see the change in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
They don't
Sure.
see the results. So then they give up and say it didn't work.
Right.
See, a lot of people don't believe affirmations work.
Mm.
And the reason they don't work for most people is they'll say the affirmation. Let's say you and I said, I'm so happy and grateful now. I'm weighing my perfect weight, looking good and feeling great. But then the rest of the day, we're eating like crap. Well, we're not going to change.
Yeah. Right.
The affirmation only works if you have a visceral experience with it day to day. So you
Mm.
start thinking, feeling, and acting like that person. The interesting about future self, it's been so polarized recently.
Mm.
And it's been around for hundreds of years. William James really brought future self into the world. Like,
Right.
he brought neuroplasticity into the world before it was ever a thing.
Mm.
So, like, our program is running us. 95% of all of our days is on repeat,
Right.
unless we consciously decide we're going to be somebody else.
Right.
But like the program, a lot of people are fighting the program instead of understanding it.
Mm.
Like, we can't outperform our program. But our program, just like you and I, when we were growing up, when we were first born, your parents didn't just say, your name is Nicholas, and you know your name. They say, Nick, you're so cute. Nick, you're walking. Nick, you're running. Nick, that was such a great smile. But they kept repeating it over and over again. It's the repetition that we have to get emotionally involved with what we want, that is going to change the program. But as we get older, repetition is so illogical to the paradigm. The paradigm fights it. It says,
Mm.
you've already read this. You've already done this. You know, as an entrepreneur, there's real key components we have to have. We have to always upgrade our belief system and upgrade our skill set.
Right.
So deliberate practice is crucial, that we drill our weaknesses that are essential, that we can't leverage, that we have to do over and over again. And it's so boring and monotonous, but it is so impactful. But a lot of entrepreneurs are not doing whatever it takes. That's what I see until I put the mirror up in front of them. Our results are not by accident. There's nothing more accurate in our lives than our results,
Right.
because our results are a compass of our life. They tell us exactly what we've been putting out. You know, so once we start taking care of us, everybody that I meet, and I don't know, you probably have the same, I would imagine. They want to be successful. They
Right.
want to be free,
Right.
right? But freedom is a price, And not everyone's willing to pay that price. That price is discipline. That
Mm,
price is mentorship.
mm.
That price is changing your environment. Like if you showed me your friend, I'll show you your friends you hang out with. I'll show you your future, right? The people we're around influence us so much. The books we read influence us so much. The people we constantly are getting who are higher than us, that's what we want. We don't want to be the smartest person in the room,
Right.
so we can leverage their knowledge.
Oh, there's so much good there. We've been talking a little bit about future self, and I want to get back to a little bit about your processes because, in my opinion, and you might not agree. I would love to see your take on this. In my opinion, what I love about Voss Coaching Co. is that it bridges the gap because there's so many people out there who understand law of attraction, law of manifestation. They all, the secret stuff, the Dispenza stuff, like all that stuff. There's so many people who have the knowledge and they're consuming it, and yet I don't know if this is a line that you came up with or we came up with when we were working with some of your copy, but the idea was there's so many people who visualize yet are unable to realize the visualization. And I find what you talk about is that call it a quantum accelerator. It bridges the gap between all that we know true about the self-development world, but then taking the actions that are aligned with our identity in order to see that come to pass. True or not true based on what the work that you do?
Yeah, true. I mean,
Okay.
I was an example of that. So I could
So
be,
perfect. I don't want to cut you there, but that's a
I could,
perfect segue because I was like, we talked a lot about future self, but could you take us back to past self, like past Arash? Because there's always this thing that people think of like, oh, well, he was mentored with Bob Proctor and he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and he grew up in the wealthiest neighborhoods in the world and he doesn't know what it feels like to suffer. And I don't know you well enough to say that that's not true. I know some of the situations you had in your life, but like, can we paint a little picture to provide some perspective on the past self that you grew out of and who you are today?
yeah, I mean, like, I don't think anybody wins big unless they lost big. I think
Mm,
there has to be a level of dissatisfaction that causes us to really look at life differently, that we want to transform ourselves. And that was me. For 3 years, I was the epitome of what you just explained.
mm,
I would read books,
right,
I would visualize, I would do whatever that I understood the books were telling me to do from my
right.
awareness, but I wasn't creating any results.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I picked up Think and Grow Rich, I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do
Mm,
exactly what this book tells me. Well, I did it in the best of my ability, but I didn't create any results.
right.
And so what happened for me, I was in a corporate job and I worked my way out of college from the bottom of the company to the top. I became vice president of sales. I topped out at 110,000 a year.
Was that
And I'm
just you working hard kind of thing?
working hard. Yeah, just course correcting.
Right.
I grew up playing sports, so competition was a big thing. So it was more competing with myself.
Right.
Anyhow, there was this rumor that our company was going to sell. So I went to the president because I was the only person I reported to. And I said, I hear these rumors. I'm getting married in a few weeks. I just want
Mm,
to know if they're true. And the president says, you'd be one of the first to know if they were true. They're not true. The next day I walked in, the company sold.
oh gosh.
And I remember, I really believe this was the day that changed my life. I
Mm,
remember walking out and I was so angry. They lied to me. I had all these stories. And then this voice said, they're not your problem. You're the problem.
mm,
And my philosophy literally changed in that moment. It was like I turned walking, like having, shaming myself into taking responsibility. And then I said, I'm not going to allow anyone to be responsible for my life and my income again.
mm,
And the new company comes in and they want to keep me. And I say no. And at this time, I mean, I was really up against it. I had a foreclosure sticker on my garage.
right.
I was getting married 3 weeks later. I come home and I tell my wife, my fiance at the time, I say, I'm not taking their job. And
Wow.
she said, are we going to be okay? I said, yeah, we'll be okay. I had no idea. Um, that next day, I get a phone call And this gentleman says, you need to talk to my friend. He said, who's your friend? I said, Bob Proctor. I said, you're kidding me. I said, I've studied Bob. I love all his information. And he gets Bob on the phone with me and he said, what is it that you want? And I said, I don't really know. I said, I want to create a life of freedom doing what I love.
Mm.
And he said, so you do know what you want.
Hmm.
And then he was so matter of fact. He said, I can help you. And he said, but you have to do exactly what I tell you to do. He said, you can't do half, you can't do three-fourths. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, how much is this going to cost?
Right.
You know,
Sure.
because I didn't have it.
Yeah.
And he said, if you'll do exactly what I tell you to do, everything will change. And I said,
Mm.
Bob, I got to be honest with you. If you're going to help me, you need to know me. I've never done exactly what anyone's told me. I'm a great starter and a terrible finisher. And he starts laughing and he says, you sound like me. And something overtook me. And I said, I'm going to make this into a game. For 1 year, I'm going to do exactly what he tells me to do. I leveraged myself completely. Whatever credit cards I had left, I used. But I
Mm.
said, I'm going to do exactly what he tells me to do. And to this day, him and I would talk. What was it that made you finally do it?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you have to be in the right place with the right person. And I think his belief in me changed it. Within 90 days, I went from nothing to earning 10,000 a month, which was like a huge deal for me at that time.
Right.
Within 7 months, I was earning 35,000 a month. Within 2 years, I earned my first million. And he said to me, he said, you need to be doing what I'm doing. He said,
Mm.
I'll teach you how.
Wow.
And him and I partnered. We had a very similar story in terms of his mentor was Earl Nightingale. He became vice president of sales for Nightingale Conant. Well, I became vice president of sales for Bob's company.
Yeah.
And but I could have never imagined that we would be as close as we were and the type of bond we had. And I was such a sponge. That's why I say you have to be a great follower before you can be a great leader. And at the end of his life, I was with him before he passed, and he said, I'm passing the baton to you.
Wow.
And, you know, it was a great honor. I take it with great responsibility. And we've been blessed to use that example. I think my example helps a lot of people because I've been on the
Right.
other side.
Right.
And, but to answer your other part of your question, without action, nothing happens.
Right.
And my biggest problem with this philosophy when I was going through it, before I learned it properly, is there's so much information you can get sucked in the information. There's so many different philosophies around success that you can really be doing way too many things.
Sure.
But when you get somebody like me who turned it into specialized knowledge and can show you the exact processes, because I have a process to create a new belief. I have a process on goal achieving. I have a process on how to transform your identity, process on leadership, process on selling. So you start working on these processes
Mm.
and the results happen by default.
Because it's not now about trying to figure anything out. It's just about following the playbook or the blueprint.
That's exactly right. Most people, Nick, are chasing success.
Mm.
Success you never chase. Success always happens by the person you become. So you're going to have, as people grow, they're going to have goals, they're going to have obstacles. The bigger the goal, the bigger the obstacle, because we
Right.
have to continue transforming ourselves. But the obstacles are not there to stop us. They're there to make us stronger. They're there to have us build more character. They're there to disrupt comfort. Because I believe the universe tests us to see how badly we really want it.
Sure.
Before any quantum leap I've ever achieved in my life, there was some form of plateau and adversity. And that's where persistence and relentless persistence is essential.
It reminds me, this is a grotesque comparison, but it reminds me, I don't know, back in the day, if you ever watched the Saw series of movies.
Yeah, I did.
And I mean, it was grotesque and I didn't enjoy the horrific part of about it, but the fundamental premise is very similar to what you're talking about. It's like, how much do you value your own life?
That's right.
It's, are you willing to do what it takes, or are you just going to throw up your hands and give up and let the situation dictate whatever the future is, or are you going to fight for it? It's also like that, the climber who got stuck between the rocks and ended up having to cut off his arm because he
Right.
valued life more than his arm.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing. I'd love to ask you about that, because like, whether it's the fictional story of the person in the Saw series, whether it's the guy who got stuck in between the rocks and had to cut off his arm to live, every time you read about some of the greats, let's say athletics, and you said you were an athlete and you were super competitive, the one thing that is true of all the top winners in every sport thing that I've ever looked at, I'm watching the Tour de France series on Netflix and the F1 series and all the Michael Jordans of the world and the LeBron James of the world. And one undoubtable characteristic that seems to be a thread is this idea of competition. It's like, you've got to want it. You've got, Kobe said it, you've got to you've got to make some sacrifices to get there. And I think I know the answer, but I'd love your take on it. A, is that true? And B, for the person who might be watching or listening to say, but I don't have that competitive nature. I don't have that drive. I was listening to the Acquired podcast earlier today, and it was an episode with Mark Zuckerberg, and same sort of thing. He's like, I'm super competitive. Bill Gates, I'm super competitive. I do not get distracted. I go after the gold. Is that a necessary trait, A? And B, for those who may not feel like they have that trait, because you might look into the world and say, well, there can only be one of the best of everything, so I'm not going to fight or whatever. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think everybody's innately competitive.
Hmm.
I see some of the people who think they're not competitive, they've never allowed themselves to dream
Ah,
because we're all the same. Like we all are a soul. The essence of our being is for growth and expansion. So we're meant to keep getting better and better. Like a lot of people don't like when I say this, but I'm going to say it because I know it's true.
yeah.
We're meant to be dissatisfied.
Huh.
Dissatisfaction is a very creative state because our soul is on to the next thing. Where people lose their competitive juice is they stop dreaming.
Got it.
And we've got to understand how important our want is. Everything starts with a want.
Mm,
Now, I would say the person who's not competitive is not firing their want. They're not nourishing it and feeding it, so it turns into a desire. So
mm.
if you look at most people, now someone might message you something else, but I'd love to hear it because if you're not competing with yourself, I never compete with anybody else.
That's
The
a good
only
good
person
distinction.
I compete against is beating my personal best from the day before.
Right.
I'm competing against my potential. But potential isn't enough. Everyone has potential. It's
Mm,
our defining choices. So our want, we have to understand this. Our want is meant to be fulfilled. Anything you and I want, it's meant to be fulfilled. Now, sometimes it's not because people don't accept that want. They
sure.
don't turn it into a desire. I had a client, it was so funny. He's doing one of my group coaching courses. And he said, if I can have anything I want, Arash, how come I'm not as good as Michael Jordan was? And I said, okay, I got a question for you. Do you play basketball? And he said,
Mm.
no. I said, what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing? And I said, the want, like your want, Nick, my want are different because they're unique to us.
Right.
But the want comes from the essence of who we are. It starts in our subconscious mind, goes to our conscious mind, and our job is to radically accept that idea. This
Mm,
is what I'm doing no matter what. Then we feed it through repetition, and then we start falling in love with the idea. And then when you're in love with an idea, it's a love story. It's always on your mind. Like when you were in love, you didn't have to think of the person, they were always on your mind. Our goal and our want has to be a magnificent obsession. It has to always be on our mind. Then I would tell you that person would compete against themselves. But that's the creation process. But our wants are not to get. That's what people don't understand.
hmm.
Our wants are about our growth. So we're not going after a material thing. I know some people think they are.
Sure.
I know I used to think I was.
Hmm.
You're chasing a feeling. And I wanted to create, because I was in such a bad financial spot, I wanted to create financial freedom.
Right.
But while I was going after financial freedom, what I was really going after was emotional freedom. And I've discovered emotional freedom is what creates financial freedom. So when we start understanding us better, we're going to go after bigger goals because you're going to realize why you're going after the bigger goal. And it's all about the growing. But when we're talking about this, a lot of people want to achieve their goals, right? They want to achieve their goals. They want the receiving part, but they forget the act of giving. The act of giving triggers the act of receiving. The minute we give, so we got to become great givers. And we've got to give so much greater service than what we get paid for. And when we do that, the law of compensation will take care of us.
I want to devil's advocate is probably the wrong angle to take, but like even I hear the story with Bob and you, and like the idea that you got a phone call from someone that said, "I need you to talk to some guy." It was Bob on the other line. You end up getting to work with him for so many years. Bob hands the baton off to you, which is no small feat. Like it's a real thing. How much of that was because I'm assuming you knew who Bob Proctor was and you were studying and you were going through your career, but it's not like you had an affirmation or a vision on the wall that says one day Bob Proctor will call me, or one day I will be by his side, and one day I will carry on his legacy through his work and develop it into even something more than it is today. Is that some might describe that as luck, some as karmic in nature, where just it was aligned to be that way. How do you kind of explain or describe for people how these beautiful synchronicities can happen in our own lives that then thrust us into the quantum leaps and the breakthroughs and the things that we desire?
For me, it's pretty clear what happened.
Okay.
It was 3 years of doing the work, even though I wasn't doing it properly, inside. I didn't see the results because exponential growth is very deceptive.
Right.
And it wasn't by accident. Nothing happens by accident that I had to meet this person that I didn't even know connect the new Bob. And honestly, I didn't, even when I was on that call, I never thought I was going to get mentored by him.
Right.
Mentorship was so different 17 years ago than it is now. Now it's pretty easy to go online and look for a mentor. At that time, it was not.
Yeah.
I remember reading all these books, just find a mentor and do exactly what they tell you. And I remember, where are you finding these people? So I think why Bob and I got attracted to each other is because I wasn't chasing him. I didn't even think it was a possibility.
Yeah.
Even when we started, I wasn't enamored. Oh my God, it's Bob Proctor. I just said, I need you to help me, because I'm losing.
I love
And
that.
so I think because I wasn't attached or I didn't make it too big in my mind is how it came. The funny story about this is the person who connected Bob and I didn't turn out to be the best for either of us.
Interesting.
But Bob used to tell me the reason both of us met him was to connect us because there was a purpose, because neither of us talked to him.
Right.
So what's interesting, if I've always believed this, if you keep putting good out, you
Right.
keep focused, the good is going to be attracted to you. It may not be Bob Proctor, it may not be me, but it'll be somebody. So our job is to keep our mind obsessed, and I mean obsessed in a healthy way.
Right.
A lot of people hear that word obsess and obsession is bad. Only bad obsessions are bad.
Sure.
But our job is to fill our conscious mind always thinking about what we want. And then our subconscious takes it to the finish line. And I think that's what happened for
I
us.
love that.
I'll tell you a funny story about this.
Sure.
3 months before, I got this phone call. Okay. Bob comes, and I used to bitch. Bob never comes to Scottsdale, where I live in Arizona.
Yeah.
And I get this email, he's coming for an hour to talk. So my wife and I go, and he's taking all these pictures with people. And I'm like, no, I don't want a picture. My wife's like, you're gonna regret it. So she goes up and he shakes my hand. We have this picture together.
Yeah.
He shakes my hand. I don't know what came over me. I didn't even believe it. I said, you and I will be working together someday.
No kidding.
Honest to God, that happened.
Wow.
And 3 months later, we're on the phone.
Yeah.
So it's pretty magical. I can't tell you how exactly everything is connected, but everything's connected.
Right.
And
Right.
so our job is to match, like Einstein said, match the frequency of what we want. That's all we have to do.
I love that. Translating, there's a lot of listeners and viewers here who are entrepreneurs, various degrees of companies and whatnot. Can you talk about how some of this, because I mean, the growth of Voss Coaching Co. is only a few years old now. Not even a few years, actually, for that matter. And the levels of growth and what you've managed to obtain here is pretty incredible. It's not surprising based on what you do and how you talk about these things. But could you talk about, for the business person who's on the other end saying, like, how do I then take this, or maybe some of the lessons that you learn in the building of a company from, leaving Bob, starting your own thing with Mikey, now seeing the success and only really skimming the surface of where this thing is going to go. What are some of the lessons that stand out, whether they're the tipping points or lessons around marketing, lessons around teams and people or hiring? Or are those the wrong questions to be asking because it's less about the strategy and more about the person you're becoming and the identity, and trusting that those skills come when they're needed because of who you're being in that moment?
Well, it's kind of a combination. I mean, I think Jim Rohn said it the best. You have to work harder on yourself than you do your business. And so personal transformation, if you're an entrepreneur, is a prerequisite.
Sure.
And so, but you have to make the move before you're ready. Too many entrepreneurs are planning to plan.
Right.
When you make the move before you're ready, that's what we did. And that's what
Right.
we continue to do.
Right.
When you make the move before you're ready, the strategy shows up. And entrepreneurs that I coach, when I first work with them, when they're stuck, it's not like they're not doing okay, but they're not doing what they know they're capable of. It's
Yes.
because their strategy is too complicated. It's impossible to scale with a complicated strategy because it's not duplicatable. So you want to simplify your strategy and it will scale. But as an entrepreneur, you have to have significantly high standards, and you want to keep building those standards because our standards are our DNA to success. They're
Right.
our foundation. You have to be willing to fail and have a great relationship with failure. Because if you're not willing to fail, you're not willing to win. And so you have to fail at your future self than succeed at your present self.
Oh, that's
And
good.
most entrepreneurs are more willing to succeed at their present self if they're plateaued or stuck. But if you keep failing, massive jump. So you have to be willing to risk. The person who's not willing to risk, they're risking the most. But we got to look at, how am I communicating? Like, if you look at communication, as an entrepreneur, it's essential to be a great communicator. If you just look at YouTube, I mean, how many billions of dollars are earned on YouTube? And that's just through communication.
Right.
And so you have to be a great sales professional because you can't help somebody until you sell them.
Right.
But I kind of laugh at this, and I don't mean to laugh, but I really do. Like, people are afraid to promote their company.
Right.
And if they're not willing to communicate effectively to promote their company, how are they going to draw their ideal clients to them? So I think it's a mixture of building culture. Leadership is going to be critical. The type of team you build, the type of outsources, how you communicate with leveraging the people you outsource. So at the end of the day, everything's mindset.
Right.
Some people don't want to believe it, but 95% of success is mindset, 5% is strategy.
Yeah, I love that. We've been talking a lot about your mentors, talking about coaching, talking about you helping people, people helping you. If I were to turn around in another way and ask, What was the worst piece of advice you were ever given? Do you remember that at all?
The worst piece of advice from a mentor, you're asking me?
Sure, or from anybody, but just advice, whether you took it or not is besides the point. But do you remember ever being given advice that you thought, well, that's probably the worst thing I've ever heard, and I either did it and paid for it at the end, or I'm not even going to bother doing it.
Yeah, I remember I got this advice. I had been doing well at this point, and then I set a really big goal. Like
Yeah.
I doubled what I even set, which at this level was significantly higher. And this gentleman said, it's going to be so much harder to do that. And
Hmm.
I remember it didn't feel right.
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
rejected it. And I said, I actually used it for fuel. So I said, I'm going to prove it. And I did it. And the funny thing is, I showed him and he goes, you're right. I'm glad you didn't listen to me. Um,
That's great.
there was another piece, like, um, as I shared, my mentor was a close friend of mine. And I was thinking about buying this real estate. And he said, don't buy real estate. It's going to be another responsibility.
Hmm.
And then about a week later, he said, did you buy it? I said, yeah. And then he said, you didn't listen to me. I said, no, I didn't. And then 2 years later, I sold it for a seven-figure profit.
Right.
I bought it during COVID, and he said, thank God you didn't listen to me.
Wow.
I've
Wow.
always been connected to my intuition.
Got it.
I coach intuitively, I make decisions intuitively. So I kind of let my energy guide me.
I like
Uh,
that.
I always say people can lie to themselves, but their energy can never lie. So that's what I've always went off of.
I love that. Two more questions, I think, and we can wrap this up. What would you say is one or some of the most misunderstood things about performance, breakthroughs, success, quantum leaps? Because there's not like there's a lack of information out there, right? Everyone's reading the books, attending the conferences, doing the things, etc. They are a term I've developed in the marketing world is infobesity. It's where you consume more than you actually implement on, and so you just hoard more information. You don't do anything with it. So information and knowledge is obviously not the problem, but it seems like there's a lot to misunderstand when it comes to success and performance. And I know we talked a little bit about that already, but is there a piece that's just clearly misunderstood that should be understood for those who are looking to pursue and achieve? Pursue is probably actually the wrong word now that we're talking, but to achieve and to come into alignment, the future self reality of what they're being.
I think there's a lot of smart people who are creating very poor results. They
Right.
have a lot of degrees, they have a lot of checks on the board, but they don't know how to think.
Hmm.
And so most people are not thinking. When we're letting the outside control us, we're not thinking. And people do not understand how important attitude is. They don't
Wow.
even understand what attitude is.
Ah.
Attitude to me is more important than my goals. It's more important to me just about everything other than my family because our creates attitude is our thoughts, feelings, and actions combined.
Hmm.
And somebody could have a very optimistic, bubbly attitude, but they're always in lack and limitation. Well, they're operating from a negative mental attitude. So our attitude is what creates results. And our attitude, like if we boil this down, it's very simple. It's your attitude plus your effort that's going to create your results. But
I
attitude
like
means I
that.
think in a certain way, I feel in that certain way, and then I'm going to act in that certain way. So, when you've gotten to this point, you're like, I am doing this no matter what. That's an attitude. People look at their income. That's an attitude.
Hmm.
I remember my attitude changed so much around income. I was sitting in this seminar, and this was way well before I got mentored. And my mentors, it was actually his seminar, the one I was telling you about earlier. And
Yeah.
he said, you can create your own economy. I couldn't stop thinking about that. And I walked out of that room. I'm like, that is a hell of a good idea. And
Huh.
then he said, your goal should be you should turn your annual income into my monthly income. I mean, I was paycheck to paycheck. But that idea started percolating in me. And then I committed to doing it, and I've done it 10 times. And
Right.
what I will tell you, what ideas are we rejecting because of not questioning our assumptions?
Good.
We've got to question our assumptions and say, is this assumption accurate with how I want to live? Because we're all creating our destiny, but we're operating with false assumptions. But most people don't ask themselves the right questions, and questions shape behavior, questions shape identity. So questions are our best friend. But if we can start understanding the mind, create the right processes, because Nick, for you, me, everybody listening to this, their goal demands a certain process.
Right.
So you build the process from the goal. You don't build it because you've already done it. What got
Mm.
us here is not going to take us there. So if you're not around people with a much higher level of understanding and awareness, you're going to really be on that hamster wheel and grinding, which you don't have to.
Yeah. What I love about our conversation, I do have one last question. What I love about our conversation is a good friend of mine, Dan Martell's in the coaching space for SaaS founders and various other people. And he goes, part of my job as a coach is to show my clients what is possible. Because once they see it, they can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And I feel like this conversation has done that not only for me, but probably the people who are listening. So thank you, Raj, for showing us what is possible, even simple statements. And I've heard it before, but you hear it again and you're like, yeah, what if you could make your annual income your monthly income? And then you come around and say, well, I've done that 10 times.
Yeah.
Once you've seen it and once you've heard it, you can't unsee it. And so it opens up the possibility. So I want to thank you for that. Final question is this. I want you to imagine you're on a stage at a banquet or some sort of a celebratory event, and you're achieving a lifetime achievement award. So you're being handed this award for your lifetime achievement. Essentially, let's say it's the end of life and then you can't do anything more. And you're being recognized for everything you have done, just like the Grammys or the Emmys. When that microphone comes up and you have a minute left on the clock, what I want to know is, who do you thank as part of your speech for receiving this award? Who are the people? They could be mentors, colleagues, business partners, friends, clients. Who are the people you thank and why?
I mean, number one, I think my wife and my two kids, because they're my why.
Right.
I thank my brother because he's my best friend. Uh,
Wow.
I thank my parents who passed because they led the way
Mm,
with a lot of my character.
mm,
I thank my business partner because she's not just a business partner, she's a great friend of mine. And I thank the person who had the greatest influence on me was my mentor, and I would thank him. I thank him all the time because he got me to fall in love with much bigger ideas.
mm,
And like when you have people who impact you and then they leave. I remember my mentor, I was thanking him. This was like year two of us working together. I said, I just want to thank you. He said, you're going to appreciate me a lot more when I'm gone than while I'm here.
wow.
And he
Wow.
said, his mentor, Earl Nightingale, told him that. And now I can understand what he means.
Right.
But I would thank my clients more than anybody because they give me the drive to keep getting better at my craft.
Speaking of clients, before I thank you for this episode, um, for those who say, "Gosh darn it," there's some sort of connection, there's some sort of resonance, there's something that Arash has said that makes me want to pursue working with him more. Can you just briefly talk about what it means to work with you in the various capacities and where someone can go to learn more about that?
Yeah, I would recommend first of them to go to vosscoachingco.com.
Yep.
Um, we have a different array of programs, and we make sure we match the perfect program for you.
Mm,
There's options for corporate coaching, one-on-one coaching if it's a fit. So I've trained my team so well that we make sure it's a win-win. But we
mm,
want to also paint the picture of where somebody is right now, why they're there, and I will show you how to get there. The great part for me, because of all my years of experience of doing this and all my clients' results, so I always get so much joy out of my clients' results. because it keeps the work always works if you do the work.
Right.
But I know why somebody's where they are, and I know what they have to do to get to where they want to go. So we make this very specialized for each individual, so nobody gets lost in the shuffle.
I love that. So we will make sure we include that link as well in the show notes so everyone can do that. Everybody, we've been talking to Arash Vossoughi here, co-founder, lead coach, mentor, inspire, everything that you do for everybody from Voss Coaching Co. For everyone, thanks for joining us here. Remember that there are only so many hours in a day, so stop wasting them and focus on what's important, and that is the bottom line. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Bottom Line Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.